Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and let me introduce you to the Bullitt Mustang. There are certain machines out there that can make a grown man weak at the knees, and when he sees and hears these machines, he gets a warm fuzzy sensation inside, maybe a goosebump or two, but will definitely let off an audible groan. Now I tend to call these mini-mangasms, sorry ladies. Now the machines I'm talking about are definitely old school, built before a time of WLTP and noise regulations. And if you're still not sure what I'm talking about, well, the two sounds that make me weak at the knees are the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and the Vulcan Howl. Now you see where I'm getting at. Now next to me I have got the Bullitt Mustang, and I've been waiting a year to review this car. Thank you very much, COVID. And I've had this Bullitt for a week, and I'm going to let you know if I can add another machine to my list that makes me weak at the knees. When it comes to the styling of the Bullitt, of course it was made to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Steve McQueen film, made famous by that San Francisco car chase. But you got to take your hats off to the designers at Ford, because they've done a bloody good job paying homage to that original Mustang. I love the Highland green and the 19-inch retro style alloy wheels. It actually screams baddie car now, and as a result, and because of the limited production run, everyone turns to have a look at the Bullitt when they see it. That's one of the reasons I'm really warming up to it, because the looks I get in this car are absolutely brilliant. But you know what? I think that's enough of looking at the outside of the Bullitt. Let's have a little sit on the inside. Sat in the Bullitt, you are greeted by a very comfortable and very American style interior. I'll get onto that in a little bit. Now of course, this being a big two-door coupe, it does mean that getting in and out of the Bullitt is really easy, because the doors are massive and they do open nice and wide. However, they are heavy, so if you are in a tight car parking space and there's a car next to you, just be careful not to ding that car as you get in and out of the Bullitt. And then once you're sat in the Bullitt, you are greeted by these gorgeous one-piece Recaro seats, and although they look very heavily bolstered on the sides, they actually hold a big bear like me in place, and they don't pinch my kidneys. So I could do a long journey in the Bullitt and come out the other end feeling pretty relaxed. Now there is plenty of adjustment in the seat itself. Now the base is electrically adjustable, and it also comes with lumbar support. However, to do the seat backs, it is done via a ratchet. So make sure you adjust your seat when you're stationary, otherwise if you do it when you're on the go, you're just going to go flying backwards. So that's just something to be aware of. And then we have got the steering, which has, if I can find the lever, there it is. Both rake and reach adjustments, so getting the perfect driving position is easy. When it comes to interior quality, this is where the Bullitt feels like a very American car, and not necessarily in a good way. The interior simply cannot compete with its European rivals, namely the BMW M2 Competition and Porsche Cayman S. Now yes, we have got some leatherette here on top of the dash, on the sides of the centre console and on the centre console itself, not to mention on top of the doors and the door panels as well. They do feel really nice to touch, and it's also great to rest your knee against it when you're on a long journey. Again, it adds to that comfort of the interior. But when they get to the hard scratchy plastics, they really are hard and scratchy, and they do feel pretty cheap, which is very disappointing in a car that's just shy of £50,000. There's also this metal effect trim here on the centre of the dash. Yes, it's meant to liven up the cabin, but again, it feels pretty cheap, and especially for that price tag. But it is a very comfortable place to be. I do love the fact that we've got physical buttons everywhere, and they feel really nicely damped. And I do love the fact as well that we've got these old school switches here, which are very reminiscent of Mustangs of old. And I do like the steering wheel as well. Actually, the leather on here feels really nice, and it's great to just hold on to. And there is a plethora of buttons across the steering wheel as well. When it comes to cubby spaces, it's actually not too bad in here. Now firstly, the door bins aren't the biggest, however they do go very deep and into the door, so just be aware you could lose some items in there. I'm surprised Ford haven't put an umbrella in there like a Rolls-Royce or a Skoda to make use of that space. Now it's not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit in there. But there is a cute little cubby space on the right hand side of the steering wheel. It is lined with fabric, and you can put some loose change in there, and it's a really handy feature. And then just in front of the gear lever, we have got a little tray there where you can put your phone, and you've got one USB and a 12-volt socket. And then just behind the gear lever, we've got a couple of cup holders, which have got some little plastic grippers to hold your bottle in place. But just beware, if you do put something in there, it is going to get in the way of the gear lever. So that's just something to be aware of when you're driving. And then just behind the cup holders, we have got the center armrest. And we have got a bit of additional space in here with a 12-volt socket and an extra USB. And there are a couple of little trays in there to put some loose change. And then we've got the glove box, which is of an okay size. Again, it's not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit, but it is lockable, so that is a very handy feature. But it's just not as big as what I was expecting. And that's pretty much it when it comes to cubby spaces, but they are decent enough and you can hide away some valuable items, especially if you're going to be leaving the car unattended. Something you got on the facelifted Mustang, and you do get it on this Bullitt, is the new digital display. It's actually really lovely to look at. I do like the animations, and it's easy to read when on the move. And you just use the steering wheel controls to access certain features like the sports mode or the exhaust mode whilst you're driving. And I do love the fact as well that the dials do change depending on what mode you're in. And then we've got the main infotainment system, which is one of Ford's kind of standard sync units, and it's not too bad. I mean, yes, the graphics are starting to look a little bit dated, but you have got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so that is a bonus. But in terms of the fluidity and the usage of it, it is pretty easy to use if it's not as sharp or crisp as something you get from the Volkswagen group. And finally, I do love all the little Bullitt references in here. We have got the Pull Q gear knob, which is just a joy to use, the Bullitt badge on the steering wheel, and the fact it's also a numbered car. Also, to match the green exterior paintwork, we have got green stitching on the seats as well as on the Recaro badging as well, not to mention the interior lighting. Now, usually this would be the point where I say that's enough of looking at the front of the Bullitt, let's go sit in the back. But I'm going to be honest, those seats are pretty much useless. In fact, only kids can sit back there, but if you have a tall driver and tall passenger, actually kids wouldn't be able to sit back there at all. Now, yes, you have got some Isofix supports in the back, but I'll be honest, there is a Mustang you can get where the rear seats are much more useful, and that is the Mustang Mach-E, which is the replacement for this, possibly, and it's an EV and an SUV, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. And now it's time, I think, we have a little look at the boot. Now, opening the boot on a standard Mustang would present you with 408 litres of space, which isn't too bad for this segment of car. In fact, Ford are really proud of the fact that you can get 2 sets of golf bats into the trunk of your Mustang. But this isn't a regular Mustang, this is a Bullitt, and as a result, one of the standard bits of equipment you get is a 1000-watt Bang & Olufsen sound system, which means in the boot you do have one of the largest subwoofers I've ever seen fitted to a production car. So as a result, you have less than the 408 litres as I mentioned earlier. It also means you can't get your 2 sets of golf bats into the trunk of your Mustang. So if you love your golf but you want the Bullitt, you're going to have to make a sacrifice, and obviously that sacrifice is golf. Now, in regards to the features on the Mustang's boot, it's actually a little bit disappointing. Now, the opening is quite narrow because of the way the tail lights are quite highly set, but it does mean you can get something like a large suitcase and some soft bags in there, or a couple of smaller suitcases. So doing any kind of weekend trips away is absolutely fine. But when it comes to features, there really aren't any. There's no 12-volt socket, there's no tethering hooks, and if I lift up the floor, you'll find that there is space for a space-saver spare wheel, but on this particular car, we've just got the tyre puncture repair kit. So in terms of features, it's actually very disappointing, but it is big enough to have a week's worth of shopping in there, and as I said, if you're doing like a trip over the weekend, it's got plenty of room to accommodate your bags. So yeah, it's a little bit hit and miss with the boot of the Mustang, and if you do want to put the rear seats down, there's no way of doing it from the boot. You actually have to go into the car and do it from there, which makes it even more awkward. But you know what? I think it's time we take the Mustang for a drive, don't you? Okay, so usually you find me driving along, giving you my first impressions on the car I'm reviewing. But you can't do that with the Bullitt. You see, your first impressions start the moment you press that engine start button. So I've got the window down, we're on a country lane, so let's see what this Bullitt is all about. Okay, I'm starting to go a little weak at the knees there, but firstly, it's not just the sound, the whole car is shaking, there's a vibration coming through the cabin. It feels very, very visceral and very primal at the same time. It's a really nice experience. So, yeah, that's enough listening to it. Let's get moving. Okay. Wow, that engine is just glorious. A 5-litre V8. I mean, if you're buying a Mustang, you should not go for that 2.3-litre EcoBoost. I mean, why would you? That 5-litre is just wonderful with the noise, the characteristic of it. Oh, very primal. I know I've already said that, but oh, that's the feeling. Right, okay, let's get on to some serious journalism here. What is the Bullitt like once you get going? First impressions are very good. It feels very comfortable. I mean, I was expecting it to deal with bumps and imperfections really well, and it is. In terms of visibility, I'm going to say excellent, actually, considering this is a big coupe. The view out the front is wonderful, and you get this lovely hunch in the bonnet knowing that you've got that 5-litre V8 underneath. You have got some pretty thick A-pillars, and only on a couple of occasions have I found myself looking around them at any junctions. However, the big surprise is when you look over your shoulder and you actually find there's not the thickest of C-pillars. So all-round visibility is actually really good. Even looking behind me, I was expecting like a narrow slit of a rear view window, but it's not. It's just really good. All-round visibility is brilliant, and it is very comfortable, and it feels like a solid piece of metal to be in as well. Of course, you wouldn't expect anything less from an American muscle car. So yeah, first impressions of the Bullitt, bloody wonderful. Okay, so I know I'm reviewing the Bullitt Mustang, and it is technically only one trim level to go for, but there are other Mustangs in the range. Now, the sad news is, as I'm filming this and doing this review, the Bullitt has sold out. It has been discontinued, but it has been replaced with the Mach 1, and that is its kind of own special edition version of the Mustang. If you don't want a special edition, of course you can go for the GT version, and then you can add a few optional extras to it to really customize it and make it your own. But the Bullitt was made, as I mentioned earlier, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Steve McQueen film, and I think the guys at Ford have done a brilliant job paying homage to that original Mustang. This is just absolutely wonderful, and the looks you get when you're driving, oh yeah, you're going to get noticed. So the engine under the bonnet, as I mentioned, it is a Coyote 5-litre V8 producing 453 brake horsepower and 390 pounds-feet of torque, which means that this big muscle car can get from 0 to 60 in just under 5 seconds, depending on how well you can launch it. Of course, this being a muscle car, those back wheels are going to spin up very freely. But once you get going, you find that it doesn't feel that quick. I know that sounds odd to say, but it's just, if anything, it's just the pull of the engine and the noise it makes. That's what you're really after. Performance figures aren't really the key aspects of a muscle car. It's all about the atmosphere. It's all about how it makes you feel. There are faster cars out there for less money. The Volkswagen Golf R is a prime example. And also the Golf R would beat this in the corners. Again, that's not the reason you buy a Mustang. You buy it for the engine. You buy it for the way it makes you feel. And the fact as well is, when it comes to handling, this is pretty good as well. Now, in terms of economy, of course, this being a big 5-litre lumbering V8, you're going to get, what Ford say, around 30 to 32 miles per gallon. But the truth is, driving around, and I've been driving this around a lot, I've gotten from between 21 mpg all the way up to 26 mpg, and I really had to drive in a very grandma fashion in order to achieve that. But as a daily ride, that actually means it is usable. You can drive this every day and get to enjoy it. I mean, granted, every time I've driven it, I've wanted to put my foot down and kind of, you know, give the kids something to cheer over, but it's just been one of those cars when I'm driving to work especially, that it does feel absolutely fine for using every day. Not saying that you forget that there's a big lumbering V8 under the bonnet, but you get used to how it handles and how it feels, and you can just live with it. It's a really nice, comfortable car as a result. Yes, granted, it is going to affect your wallet a bit more than a Passat diesel. One thing I'll mention about the Bullitt as well is that it only comes with a 6-speed manual gearbox. There is no 10-speed auto available, but it is a wonderful gearbox, and it's not as slick as something like a Honda Civic Type R, but it is nowhere near as heavy and as mechanical as a Vauxhall Monaro VXR. It's actually got the right amount of kind of effort you need to change gear, and when you change down a gear, it does actually auto blip as well, so it does mean that the rev matching is there for you, so you can feel like a bit of a professional, and it also adds to easier gear changes. Of course, you can turn that off if you want to do some proper heel towing, but I can't do that, so I'll leave it on. One thing I've been hugely impressed with in the Bullitt is just how well it rides. I mean, yes, we've got those large 19-inch alloy wheels, but this is also fitted with the GT pack as standard, which means that the ride height is a little bit lower and the suspension is a little bit stiffer. So going over any potholes or manhole covers, I was expecting the Bullitt to be a lot more crashy, bouncy and boomy as a result, but actually it's not. It's hugely compliant and deals with the bumps and imperfections really well. Another reason for that is that this car has a £1,600 optional extra, which is the MagnaRide adaptive dampers, and apparently they can make up to 1,000 adjustments a second, which is a pretty sophisticated bit of kit. And as a result, the Bullitt just rides beautifully, and I don't mean that as a muscle car, I mean that as a car in general. I could very easily do a long distance in the Bullitt and come out the other end feeling nice and relaxed, and that's also aided by the gorgeous Recaro seats. So yeah, when it comes to the ride in the Bullitt, I was really pleasantly surprised, and again, it's making me fall for the Bullitt even more. So what's the handling like in the Bullitt? And again, I am really pleasantly surprised. I was expecting it to be a bit detached and a bit lifeless in the steering, but it's not. It's actually really direct and really responsive as a result. And it means you can chuck it into corners with a bit of enthusiasm and a bit of exuberance, and you are rewarded for it. And I don't mean getting the tail out and drifting around corners like Ken Block, but there's a confidence there that perhaps I didn't think the Bullitt would give me. And as a result, you've got a really good driver's car. I mean, taking this out just for a drive is a reward all in itself. Now, of course, the steering is nowhere near as direct as something like a Porsche Cayman S or a BMW M2 Competition, but it's not that kind of car. Everyone keeps calling the Mustang a sports car, but I see this more as a big muscle car or GT car, which just happens to handle really well. And again, it just makes me love the Bullitt even more. I'm really falling for this car. The steering is really lovely. The ride is really good. I'm surprised as well by the refinement levels. Yes, if you drive it carefully, you could probably hit that big 3.0 NPG. Okay, I don't think I'm going to hit that whilst I've got the Bullitt, because I've only got it for a week. But the more you put into it, the more you are rewarded. And that's something you don't see very often in cars these days, and I am, again, just falling for that big lump of a V8 up front. I'm just falling for the Mustang in general. Now, just like other sporty cars out there, you can go through different drive modes in the Bullitt, and there are a couple on here that will surprise you. So we have got the usual ones like normal, sport plus and race, and that turns off all the stability control management. But we've also got things like snow and wet weather, so that way you can drive this in all weather conditions. And there's even a drag mode as well. And one of the features the Bullitt can do is it can actually brake the front tyres, allowing you to spin up the rears to warm the tyres up ready for your next drag race between the lights. However, I've not done that in the Bullitt because I'm a good boy and I want to return this car with all its tread still on the tyres. And there is a final mode which is called My Mode, so essentially you can actually tailor all of the driving preferences to your own liking, and that way the Bullitt can drive just as you want it. And then down here on some of the dials you can go through the drive modes, but there's also a steering mode, so you can have it in comfort, normal or sport plus. And then you got the traction control button as well, and just a flick of that switch will turn off the traction control system. And that's one I've just been aching to turn off, but again, I've been a good bear as I review the Bullitt because, you know, this car's not mine. Now, along with those drive modes, you can actually customize the digital display in front of the steering wheel, and you can actually do quite a few features on there, so it is pretty cool. The only thing I would like to see changed on there is that you can have the sat-nav screen on that digital display like you can do in a Volkswagen Group product. Unfortunately, it does mean you have to look at the main infotainment system, which is quite low down in the center of the dashboard. But the dials themselves, they're really easy to read, especially when on the move, and everything's actually well presented. So even though there's a lot of information on screen, you're not bombarded with it. You can easily see where everything is, and then just going through the steering wheel controls, you can change what it is you want to look at. Speaking of steering wheel controls, there are a plethora of buttons across the steering wheel, and at first glance it can be a little bit daunting. But on the left hand side we've got your volume controls and skip functions for your music. Just below there we've got your adaptive cruise control functions as well. That was something that was added to the 2018 or the facelifted Mustang. On the right hand side we've got the buttons for your trip computer on the digital display, and then just below there we've got a number of singular buttons, and these cover things such as your answering and hanging up the telephone, sat nav. We've also got there as well for a settings button, and then just to the right of that we have got a little Mustang button, and when you hit that, that allows you to customize some of the fun functions of your Bullitt, so you can change the severity of the exhaust. And would you believe it, the Bullitt has a quiet mode, which is wonderful if you want to be considerate to your neighbours. But I just say, nah, I want them to hear that I've got the Bullitt Mustang, so I make sure they know that I'm about. But you can also go into things like doing launch control and where you want the revs to be when you launch your Bullitt, and other little things like that. So there's a huge amount of customization you've got at your fingertips on the digital display, and that's actually really good to have. Just be wary though, it can be a little bit time consuming, so I'd probably recommend you go through it whilst you're stationary and not on the move. Now, it's not all been positive in the Bullitt, and I have come across a couple of little niggles with my time in the Mustang, and obviously I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't let you know about them. Now, earlier on I mentioned that the perceived quality inside the Bullitt is not as good as its German rivals, but I've also noticed as well when driving along on some quite rough and poor road surfaces, a couple of little dash rattles and creaks coming into the cabin. So that's just something to be aware of, but if you're able to live with those, then that's absolutely fine. But apparently it is a trait you get from a Mustang, so if you are a previous Mustang owner, you're still going to feel right at home in the Bullitt. The other thing I've noticed as well is that the seatbelt does actually rub against my neck. Now, I've actually got my collar tucked into it to stop it from doing it, but if you are of my height and you are 5'7" tall and maybe 5'7" wide, then you might find it just rubbing on your neck there, and you might want to raise the seat a little bit. However, in a car like this, you'd rather sit as low as possible to get that nice hunkered down driving coupe position. But other than that, it's been absolutely fine. I've not really had any other criticisms, but other than that, as I mentioned, it's actually really lovely. I am just falling for it very easily, actually. I thought it was going to be one of those cars I'd have to compromise over, but I'm not. It's got a soul, it's got a character with it that I just never knew existed in many other cars. So what are my thoughts on the Bullitt Mustang? Well, it is not without its flaws. The interior quality is nowhere near as good as its German rivals, and it doesn't drive as good as some of those more precise sports cars out there. And this drinks more than an Irishman. I mean, it is going to have a significant hit on your wallet. But you know what? If you get yourself a Mustang, you don't care about those things. The fact of the matter is, probably 80% of your decision making into buying a Mustang goes to that massive lump of engine at the front. That is worth 40 of the £48,000 asking price of this Bullitt Mustang. It just happens to be a huge bonus that it rides incredibly well, it's incredibly comfortable, and it handles really well at the same time. It's got a decent sized boot, and although it is technically a 4-seater, yeah, those rear seats are pretty much useless to adults, or if you've got kids and you've got tall parents, pretty much useless to the kids as well. But the fact of the matter is, this has got a huge amount of character, and it's just, it does give you that warm fuzzy sensation in your chest. I have had goosebumps, and I've had passengers in this who've had goosebumps when I've put my foot down, and it does make me weak at the knees. I can add this to my list of machines that make me have a little mini-mangasm. This definitely goes and gets added onto that list of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and the Vulcan Howl. And the thing is, as I said, if you're after a sports car, go for the BMW M2 Competition or go for the Porsche Cayman S. They will reward you in such a different way to the Mustang, and that's the thing. You can drive those cars and you can get those rewards. However, there is one thing that they cannot do for you, and they can't do this. Not many other cars can give you that satisfaction and make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside just like that. And that's why I really love the Bullitt. I mean, I might drive, and I probably will drive, better cars this year, but if they make me feel like this, then they're doing something right, because I've never felt so attached to a car before with Auto Bez. This kind of feels like a car version of me. It's a big heavy lump that can make a bit of noise, and yeah, sure, if I start running I could probably get some speed up, but yeah, it's just absolutely brilliant, and I love the looks as well. I wish all Mustangs could look like this, but unfortunately they can't. I mean, I think this is the best looking of all the Mustangs you could possibly buy, and that's including the Shelby and also the Mach 1. It's an absolutely wonderful machine to behold, and I really don't want to give this back to Ford, and I will let them know that. One final thing I'll add to this review is, whilst I've had the Bullitt for a week and it has put a huge smile on my face every time I've driven it, and I've come home on a couple of occasions and my cheeks are aching, when planning my script for this review, I've had this little niggle in the back of my mind, and it's a little niggle of sadness, because we're in a time where WLTP regulations, noise regulations and emissions are taking over what a manufacturer can do with their cars, and as a result we're getting these cars now which will probably no longer have big daft V8s up front. They'll have V6s with a couple of turbos. They might be a hybrid, they might be a full EV, and as a result I just feel really sad in the fact that these cars will just end up being in the history books, and we'll have a new generation of people who will never get a chance to have a real fun play in them and get to experience what it's like to have that V8 just come alive for you. And what they'll do and what they'll have is they'll just be able to go into a dealership and get an EV, and they'll get excited about the whirring noise it makes or how quickly it gets to 60. Yes, electric vehicles in terms of performance are mega. I mean, I've seen what Rimac, I've seen what Porsche have done with the Taycan. It's absolutely amazing, but it's no V8. It doesn't stir your soul in the way that a V8 can. And that's the sad thing, that people will have to tell their children this is what it was like. We had times where you got the smell of rubber, the smell of petrol, and the noise and sound and vibration of a V8, and the experience, whole visceral experience it gave us. And not the fact of, yes, we got to 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, but all you had was the sound of a spaceship door opening as you drove past somebody, you know, that weird sci-fi noise. And that really is sad. So I am really enjoying this experience in the Bullitt, and I don't want it to end. I'm happy, but I am also sad at the same time.